me just kind of give you a little bit of introduction of myself. I'm Pastor Michael Guzman. I'm a part of the regional team here, so you saw me presenting earlier. I have the grandiose title of Media and Resource Pastor, and then because you hear me talk about the website, people think that I'm a web person. I stumbled into it. I learned it because I had to, because I was a pastor, and you need to do that stuff in this day and age. So I now am sharing those gifts and resources and abilities with the association. My wife and I, Kimberly, is down here. Wave your hand. They didn't know who my wife was. She's right over here in the green. We run a pet business called Riverview Kennels in Bandon. And we actually consider that our ministry frontier. We feel like we are kingdom business owners representing Jesus to pet owners, dog and cat owners. It's a very different position than being a ministry pastor. I'm an ordained pastor. I've led churches. I've been a regional pastor for years. But it's a very different place meeting non-Christians at beautiful points of need. I have a medical emergency. We've got to travel to Eugene. Somebody in Coos Bay may say, can you please take care of my beloved furry animal in this time frame? We meet people in crisis. Or we've been planning this cruise to the Bahamas for years, and now we're getting ready to go. Can you please take care of our pet? We meet people at the highs and the lows of life, and though we don't get to minister the gospel at moment one, it's been amazing the number of times Kimberly has been able to pray with people and the ways that we get to interact with all kinds of people that don't have a kingdom representative in their life at all. So it's been great to be able to do that. This presentation that I'm going to give, that I called Our Rich History and Your Place in It, it comes out of a lot of the work that you heard me present on going into the website. When Jerry said, yes, I would love for you to get a new website, I could have taken the exact wording that was there and put it on a new platform to make it mobile friendly so it would work on all of your phones. But I noticed that some of the language just felt dated because it hadn't been updated in a while. And I thought, I don't know that this is compelling for a new generation. So that's why I asked Jerry, can we talk about the language that's currently there? Could we potentially look at revising the vision, the values? I didn't know necessarily that the name was going to change, but my joke tagline was orwapog.org. That was our website before. It sounds like I'm hawking up phlegm. Can we get something that's a little bit better to communicate? It's beautiful and it's truthful. Oregon, Washington Association of the Church of God. But can we have something that flows a little bit better? So Church of God Northwest is where we landed. I started to read a book called Truth Along the Trail. Has anybody ever read that one before? Yep. Beautiful book. Great story. I learned so much about the rich history of this district and the ongoing work of the association here. I also read a book called Pioneering Evangelists by John Green. Has anybody ever read that? Great. A couple hands here. I've got links for those resources in the presentation. If you have not read those, I would encourage you to get those. I've got one other that I just recently read that I think dovetails really nicely. But I started digging into our roots because you kind of see this quote here from me. Young pastor in an existing church, 100 plus years. Let's go do new things. Everybody loved it because we were young and we were energetic. And then as soon as we proposed new things to do, nobody stepped up to do it. So I learned the hard way that you need to cast vision for change from the roots of the organization. You've got to find a way to honor, value the tangible roots of an entity like you're an insider, and then from that perspective, cast vision for change from that. And it usually functions way better. Pastor Jerry mentioned that Carl Vaders was here not too long ago, and he said, don't do what your founders did like John Green, think like your founders thought. Because doing what they did, that was a very specific era, a very specific time in human space, and doing that thing may not produce the same results that it produced in that unique time in human experience. But the way that they thought, if you can get behind what they did into how they thought, you can really unlock a lot of stuff. So these two books, like I've already mentioned, Truth Along the Trail and Pioneer Evangelists of the Pacific Northwest, were great resources. The one on the right, Pioneer Evangelist, is available for free. You can get a digital version of it if you just did a simple Google search. Truth Along the Trail is no longer in print, but I'm sure there are many church libraries that have copies of that. And since they don't exist any longer technically, though they may not be valuable on Amazon, they're very, very valuable to us. So please, if you find those in your church library, let me know, because I think we should keep those and find a way to keep telling the story. The third book that I talked about, American Nations, is brilliant. Pastor Lloyd Moritz, previous pastor for P&A, was the one that kind of tipped me off on this book. He talks about how we are the United States of America, but technically we're comprised, this author's theory is of 11 distinct nations in the United States of America. He goes in to talk about all the cultural differences that exist, the infighting that happens inside of the U.S., and I think it's keenly important for Church of God that came from the Midwest, that's a unique nation in the U.S., to the Pacific Northwest, a very different nation. And I don't know where you fit on the spectrum, but being a new Oregonian, like, it's a very divided landscape depending upon who you talk to at the local restaurant, political affiliations, ideas and innovations. And I think this book really helped me to kind of just see, one, the U.S. in a bigger frame, but also fitting into this Pacific Northwest culture that we find ourselves in. And for the current day and age, I'd highly recommend it. It was a great read. So, Jerry quoted this passage, serving God's purposes in our generation. It comes from the book of Acts. Paul is quoting it, and he gives this kind of like, you know how pastors do, this throwaway comment about David and how David did this thing. Take a look at what it says. When David had served God's purposes in his own generation, he fell asleep, he was buried, and with his ancestors, and his body decayed. Quite brilliant and simple obituary. But we pull from that idea that, man, that language of serving God's purposes for your generation. David's generation is very different than the one you grew up in. David's generation is very different than the one we're currently in. The one we're in today is very different than the one that existed not too long ago. I think we need to understand the generation, the culture, the position of the world around us. The gospel hasn't changed. Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. But we've got to serve God's purposes in a unique generation. Have you ever tried to sell something? How about go and sell landline phones today? I mean, you're going to get some hits. Some people maybe nostalgically or wishing, I don't know how to use this thing, it was way easier. But again, the technology is moving beyond that. So you may get some, but you've got to serve purposes differently in each generation. So, we ended up landing at these two key terms for our vision: pioneering and developing. And here's my premise. Fred alluded to it to some degree. Each of you in this room are either more of a pioneer or you're more of a developer. And they are very, very different value sets, actions, thoughts. When you vote in a meeting, when you raise up new ideas, if you're a pioneer, it's very different than a developer. Pioneers tend to value risk-taking. They're innovative. They're responsive in the moment. Anybody feel like they might have a pioneering itch to them? Yeah. A small amount of hands went up. Thank God that there are not more of us in the room, because we can take over new ideas all the time. I'm going to talk about immature pioneers in just a little bit. Other people are more of the developer type. They're more rooted, more resourceful, more committed, especially over the long haul. Anybody feel like I'm more of a developer than a pioneer? Many more hands going in. Yeah. So, I was kind of curious, and I thought maybe we would stand up, and pioneers go to one side of the room, developers go to the other. It's too hot to do that. There's no AC, and it's warm, so we just kind of did a pull straw about that. The research that Truth Along the Trail kind of helped me to discover is that I went and I found out, like, wow, Church of God on the Northwest has a unique fingerprint in the United States compared to any other church, movement, organization,
denomination.
It has a very unique fingerprint, and it's positioned in a really unique way. But I needed that to I needed my heart not to just say that, I needed the data to show that as well. So what I did is I did this deep dive into like the eras of the United States history, and I kind of then went and overlapped. How does Church of God play into that? And so that's what I'd love to kind of show you for this first part. The way I'd love to potentially have you participate in this, when I get to an era, you're going to see some bracketed dates. When I get to an era, if you happen to be born in that era, I would love you to stand up when I present that era. And if you happen to become an adult, let's say 18 in that era, I'd love you to stand up just so we can see the different eras that we participated in. I don't know if any of you were born or grew up in this era, but here's the first one, the colonial settlement. This is the 1600s to 1763. During this time frame, of course, we get the first Great Awakening happen. This hunger and thirst for the move of God, the Spirit of God that broke through in people. I mean, great stories in that first Great Awakening happened. So much so that John Wesley, we have Wesleyan holiness roots, John Wesley and the class systems that really radically changed the United States landscape had huge impacts during this season. Because what Wesley did, like Justin Linsizen, the pastor that presented at the very end, he took forms and practices and attached them to the wild frenzy of the evangelistic breakthrough that happened. And I've heard that other pastors who may have been more prolific or well known in that Great Awakening said, I saw a lot of people come and commit their lives to Jesus, but it was Wesley who kept them, contained them, and grew them. Huge implications have happened there. And again, notice, pioneering and Wesley doing quite a bit of developing, settling. The next era, American Revolution, 1763 to 1783. Nobody was born or became an adult then. You get 1776, the Declaration of Independence. Now that I've read American Nations, I'm reading my presentation differently. So I would encourage you, I'm not going to try to enumerate on it, but it's interesting to think about the division inside of, my distant perception back about our history, the division that existed inside of it. There were a lot of new insights that came, and it's more than just North and South. It's really brilliant. Next era, the new nation, 1783 to 1815. Now this new nation that was successful in its rebellion against Britain establishes a constitution, 1790. 1791, they recognized the Bill of Rights, that it gets ratified. And again, there was a distinct nation that contributed to that need of the Bill of Rights. Again, American nations is wonderful. You get a second Great Awakening, 1790 to 1840. The Louisiana Purchase, critically important for the development of the Pacific Northwest, takes place in 1803 because France is now bankrupt because they spent too much money gambling. 1804, Lewis and Clark depart St. Louis for the core of discovery, and they head out into our neck of the woods, and they come out on the other side of the Columbia River, trying to find a waterway, but discovering as soon as they got to the top of the mountain, there was no way they were just going to float down to the Pacific Ocean. There was a lot more road to travel than what they first expected. But it laid the pathway for those of us who came and are here today. The next era, expansion and reform, 1815 to 1880. That seedling country that is now growing in territory in huge ways. This is really kind of the cultural seedbed of our movement, Church of God. The Oregon Trail migration takes place. People are using covered wagons, like Jerry had talked about. Manifest destiny is an ideology that people are grabbing hold of. I'm not trying to enforce that and state that that was good, but I am trying to call out this was something inside of people that led them forward. The storyline here, if you're a person of color, is a very different perspective than if you're a person from dominant culture. You get the Third Great Awakening, 1855 to 1930, oftentimes debated. Was it truly a Great Awakening? Go do some research, dig into it, look at what God was doing during that time frame and the testimonies that exist there. 1859, very, very... So again, as states are forming and coming into the Union, the hot topic on each new state coming into development is it going to be a free state or is it going to be a slave state? because the balance of power that existed in the U.S. was going on. Oregon had in its original constitution that it would be a white haven, like a utopia for white people. Black people, nope, cannot be here. We will let you be free, but you must leave our state after your declaration of freedom is declared. And there were laws built around it. You had 48 hours to leave. If you did not leave within 48 hours, you are allowed to be whipped with 39 lashes. If that didn't last, a month later, you could be whipped with another 39 lashes. We have a very convoluted history in Oregon around race relationships, and you can still see it today. 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad. Now, instead of having to use the wagon to only come, or use the sea to come and the ports that are there, now the Transcontinental Railroad is established, and the way to get there is much more easily defined. Civil War and Reconstruction, 61 to 77. You get the Civil War taking place, the Emancipation Proclamation happening, Lincoln is assassinated at the end of the war, and then now we go into Reconstruction era. And again, American Nations goes into great detail about all of the division that existed inside of the United States at that time frame, and how a grand idea was very poorly executed, and how politics grabbed hold of the great things that could and should have happened and largely destroyed them or codified them into new laws for a generation that we still are living in for today. You can hate me by my comments if you want, but I'm the one with the mic right now. 1876 to 1900. This is the rise of industrial America. You've got in 1881, Church of God is established. D.S. Warner in the Midwest establishes Church of God. There were multiple starting points, but as he broke away from Church of God General Conference, that's the starting point that I'm calling 1881. And notice, 14 years later, 1893, John and Lydia Green, they arrive in Woodburn. Only 14 years after the inception of what is Church of God movement, here are our forefathers arriving on our land that we currently occupy in Woodburn. During that time frame, 2 churches were planted, Woodburn, and I can't off the top of my head remember the other one. Progressive era, 1900 to 1929. Anybody born in that time frame, would you please stand? I don't think so. 1909, what happened is that work on the West Coast needed to be organized more. And so really this type of stuff that we're doing today was born during that time frame. The Oregon State Business Association became incorporated because they needed ways to tie all of that work that was going on together. The Ministerial Association is formed in 1910. You get World War I in 14 to 21. The Spanish flu pandemic, again, really interesting to reframe that time frame around the pandemic that we recently faced, the stock market crash, the financial challenges that came out of that. But look at the gritty work that those Midwest folks planted in the Northwest did during those trying times. 8 churches planted. And again, when you read Pioneer Evangelists of the Pacific Northwest, you can see scrappy, resourceful, this really beautiful mix of pioneering risk, but beautiful development work that also goes hand in hand. If we alienate pioneers from developers, we do the church a huge misservice. Next era, 1929 to 1945. Thank you, sister. Thank you, sister. Anybody born or become an adult during this era? Give these ladies a round of applause. In 29 to 39, you get the Great Depression that comes out of that stock market crash. But in 37, Pacific Bible College, which is now Warner Pacific University, is established during that time frame. World War II, quickly on the heels, 39 to 45, and Pacific Bible College moves from Spokane to Portland in 1940. And during that time frame, Great Depression era, times are hard. 13 churches planted. Gritty, determined, risk-taking, and developing, partnering together. Now, how about this era? 45 to 68. Anybody born or become an adult in this era? 45 to 1968. I see you. I see you. Give these friends a round of applause. Look at this. I had to I made my font smaller because there's so many cultural things taking place in this time frame. 1948, bylaw committee is formed. We needed bylaws to be able to like have our work together. 1950 to 53, the Korean War, Civil Rights Movement in 54. Edgar Bush is employed as the first state evangelist. That's the first employee of our district today. He led for 4 years. That's what the 4 is there. You get the Vietnam War. Camp White Branch is established in 58. Dwight Brown, Paula's dad, becomes the next state evangelist. He leads that post from 9 years. And if you read Truth Along the Trail, Edgar's tenure is very, very different than Dwight's. And I've talked with Paula about this, and of course she's a young girl watching all of these things happen around her. But I said, it seems like Edgar was way more of a pioneer, and your dad was way more of a developer. Have you ever counted the number of churches that have Dwight Brown's fingerprints on their infrastructure? It's huge. It's huge. A developer, rooted, deeply did that. Then the college becomes Warner Pacific College in 59. The Pill, really important social piece of technology, cultural icon, came in 1960. The Fourth Great Awakening happened, another debated one. You can dig into that. JFK is assassinated. In some ways, almost like the veneer of the innocence, in a way, of the United States is getting ripped off. It's like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Is this really what we thought it was? Dwight Brown resigns in 67. There's no state evangelist for 15 years. That doesn't mean that there was like nobody to turn to. There were very robust entities, developers holding other posts that were making things happen. And it's during that year or era 14 churches planted. Sorry?
Is that a new one or is that
No, that's a new church planted. Yep, 14 new. Now, that does not mean that they remained either. And so those 14 churches planted then, I couldn't name them. I did the research and just quantified them. Some of those no longer exist to this day, but there was work to plant at that point. Thank you for that. How about this one, 1969 to 79, stand up. I'm standing up during this era. Yeah, give us a round of applause right there. We're moving from boomers to Gen X at that point. Take a look at this. We've got Watergate happening, another like scarring time frame about like, are what we stand for really the values that our leaders are holding? And notice the change there. Again, it's a short time period, only 10 years, but only one church is planted. You can see, I think about it. We just approved back there $100,000, and there was talk of $250,000. John Green would have fainted if he heard those numbers. $100,000 for one church? What are y'all doing? But the times are changing. The culture is shifting. The ground may be getting more difficult. The cultural landscape may be changing quite a bit. How about this? Anybody born in this era? 1980 to 2000? We might have pressed it. There we go. Come on. Give it up for our young brother right there. The Reagan era and the dot-com, I had to merge these two together. Ray Tuttle is employed as the state coordinator. Notice the difference in title. Evangelist is very pioneering. Coordinator, much more developer-like. You can see the philosophy of the decision makers at that time frame. World Wide Web is created in 89. 89, the Ellickson Endowment is established that we're still reaping the benefits of and using and empowering for mission right now. Sam Dunbar, who is the one who created Truth Along the Trail, is employed as the state coordinator for 12 years. We've got the Gulf War, and during that time frame, 2 churches are planted. Then we go into this, the War on Terror, 2001 to 2019. During this time frame, you've got, of course, 9/11 attack. Dave Shrout becomes the district pastor. Again, notice the shift. This was happening across the movement. This isn't something just in the Pacific Northwest. Across the movement, the role is moving from more coordinator to pastor. And then you've got the Iraq War taking place. In 17, Jerry Davison becomes the district pastor. Warner Pacific College in 18 changes its name to university as it continues to grow and develop. And then in 2018, the Pacific Coast Collective is established. That's an organization coordinating or creating relational ties between all of the districts from Alaska to Southern California on the Pacific Coast. And during that time frame, 4 churches are planted. Here's our current era. We just called it 2020 to the present. A very distinct one, and again, COVID is the tipping point in it. Things changed in the world because of COVID. What we find ourselves in, not so much as like markers, like notice those first few don't have dates, but this is the soup of the culture that we're swimming in. We're increasingly more secular and post-Christian culture, and more on the Pacific Northwest than anywhere else in the United States. And that's got to feel different for some of you from those earlier generations and eras. You've watched the world change radically, but new technologies, new ideas, good or bad, are coming from this place. MTD, moral therapeutic deism, that is the religion of our day. You should type that in and do a Google search on moral therapeutic deism. Moral, meaning that there is a right or a wrong, but guess who decides what's right and wrong? Self. Because we're a very individualized culture. Does the Bible have an authority in my life? Well, only if it fits my agenda. Therapeutic. We always want the individual to feel good at the end of that time frame. So get rid of that fire and brimstone talk you got going on. I'm feeling uncomfortable. And then deism. There's a belief in a higher power, but it's not named Jesus because that's exclusive. MTD, moral therapeutic deism, is probably a religion that has infected your church. And I know that it's got Church of God title on your sign, and I know that your pastor preaches from the Bible. But your friends and the congregants watch TV and the internet way more hours per week than they go to church and read the Bible. And the religion of the TV and the religion of the internet is MTV. And it's winning the discipleship war. We have a highly polarized country. We're just coming out of the attempted assassination of a president, potential president, again. We have COVID-19 and 20. 23, Fred and myself joined Jerry and Paula as a regional team. That's a huge development and an innovation, by the way, a pioneering innovation that many other associations aren't doing. And we've got a currently inflammatory election year. I wrote that months and months and months ago. It wasn't quite prophetic, but I just knew where we already were. And then we live in a Church of God time frame where, though our true values are unity and holiness, autonomy is this shadow value that we hold very near and dear to our heart, and it's meant to empower and release pioneers to do what God's calling them to do, but it largely leads us to establish the opposite of unity. It's our own kingdoms and our own cultures. At the time of the creation of this slideshow, there were 0 churches planted. Today at our gathering, we just celebrated that there are 2 churches that are planted and the seedbed for a 3rd one to possibly be coming. Give a round of applause to the Lord. And I don't know if you caught that from Pastor Glenn, but I heard him say this presentation is what spurred some of those thoughts on. We've got to be prepared to respond in our generation. So, pioneering and developing. You can see it all over throughout the way that Church of God is born over the course of those 13 U.S. eras. You can see that new risk-taking initiatives are needed at times, but sometimes those need to go by the wayside, and you need developed, rooted, let's make this thing last for the long haul. In a board meeting, in a Bible study, you've got people who are pioneers who are saying the right thing to a group of developers, and the developers are scared. We tried that last time, and it didn't work. And you've got all kinds of developers saying, let's go do this thing to love these people and not let a single person get left behind. And the pioneers are like, can't you see that those people have already moved on? Why are you spending all of that time on people who are not going to change? And so the battle between pioneers and developers is all over inside of our churches. We need to, and I'm going to get to it in a little bit, honor, find a place, a way to hold those two things in tension. I talked about immature and mature. Immature pioneers. You've probably seen these young upstarts in your churches before. They're wanting to move toward constant expansion, and they end up leaving ghost towns in the wake. Wait a minute. You said you wanted to do that thing, and you left that other thing, and yeah, I know, but that didn't work, so we're going to try something new. Immature pioneers are just looking for the latest thing to move into. They need to grow to maturity. But there are consequences to immature developers, too. And extreme preservation is a value that holds inside of developer hearts, and it calcifies the pioneering spirit. Many churches of God, have been taken over by developers and have pushed all of the pioneers out. That might be the reason why your church doesn't have the strength and the innovation inside of it to do something new. Because you made it safe for the developers. And the pioneers were like, all right, I'll go find someone else to play. I'll go find a ministry that allows me to work at a nonprofit and it's not held by the constraints of the church any longer. But mature pioneers, beautiful, mature pioneers, they explore the new frontier, but in a sustainable way. They're not there to prove something for their own ego. They're doing it and working in collaboration with developers. Statistically, studies say that probably 30% of the human population tend to be pioneers and 70% tend to be developers. And thank God, again, that those percentages exist, because a world run by pioneers only would be horrible. Mature developers, though, look at this. This is the positive side. They're establishing roots in the frontier. John Green, I think, had a lot of developer in him. If you read his testimony, he was slow to respond to the call to ministry. He didn't feel qualified for it. It's a beautiful testimony. And he wanted to be the number 2 or the number 3 person. He wanted to support somebody else being the point person, so he chose a different position. But what he did is he went anyway. He leveraged everything. He said goodbye to the farm that actually had been given to him as an inheritance through his marriage to his wife, and they leveraged it all, saying, we may be fools, but we're going to go do this. And he did this beautiful pioneering and developing so that it empowered more work for the future. We are experiencing fruit from that pioneer and developer mindset. So, maintaining the tension has been my word to the staff team, to the district council. We've got to learn to maintain the tension between these two. These are the 4 initiatives that I have proposed. We've got to recognize what season we're in and adapt as necessary. Why do we have new frontier language? We're pulling on the strings of pioneers because we've got to flex that muscle right now. But we need developers not just to go, great, you go do it on your own. We need the support of doing that together. Imagine if we gather next year and we're like, hey, listen, not only did we plant another church, but we had 2 more that we didn't even know were coming, and we released the funds for that. Imagine the collaboration that can take place as pioneers and developers work together. We need to create a culture that embraces both the pioneering spirit and the developing spirit. They're both really critically important. And then we've got to walk in honor toward one another, not alienating the other because they think differently and value differently than us. And they need to mobilize and release people and resources and energy toward collective kingdom initiatives. That's part of what we tasted and voted on today. So, here's the new vision. Again, now you can kind of see it out of, our cultural landscape and the eras. What are we doing today? We are now Church of God Northwest. We've changed our name because it fits culturally, it fits geographically, it fits the spirit of where we live. But our vision statement is this: we want to pioneer and develop a Jesus-shaped landscape in Oregon and Washington. We want to do both of those. We want to do the hard, gritty, risk-taking work of pioneering, the hard, gritty work of doing development work, and we want to do it together throughout all of the landscape of Oregon and Washington where God has placed us. Let me dig into the Jesus-shaped life. What does that look like? This is Luke chapter 6. Jesus, in this beautiful account from Luke, says, one of those days Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray, and he spent the night praying to God. When morning came, he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them, whom he also designated apostles. I'm going to skip their names for the time being and move on to the text. After he calls those 12 by name, he went down with them, those 12 called by name, stood in a level place. A large crowd of his disciples was there, and a great number of people from all over Judea, from Jerusalem, coastal region around Tyre and Sidon, would come to hear him and to be healed of their diseases. Those troubled by impure spirits were cured, and the people all tried to touch him, because power was coming from him, healing them all. I love this passage. I've preached on it, taught on it, meditated on it a lot. And I think it's a beautiful snapshot of the whole ministry of Jesus. I think this is what Jesus-shaped ministry looks like. It looks a little bit like this. If you've got pen and paper, draw this out real quick. Up. Jesus goes up on the mountain. And like Pastor Justin Van Sison was testifying about, he's trying to train his immature congregation. I'm sorry if you're there. Of course, you're not one of the immature ones. But he's recognizing that there are a lot of people that have a testimony of being saved years ago, but not fruit for today. Don't have the reward of intimacy with Jesus today. But Jesus was able to spend all night alone with the Father on the mountain. And he's not coming back down humble bragging about it. These are the normal rhythms and practices that he would have incorporated. It seems like he's about ready to make a big decision. So he comes down the mountain, he goes up, he comes down, and he calls the disciples in. He designates 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 12. The 13th disciple did not get selected. I think we forget that. That's a pioneering thing that developers have a hard time reconciling. But if we say yes to them, we'll say no to them. Jesus did it, and he didn't do it with malice in his heart. He loved. But he knew that he could invest in a few to reach the many. And so many times, we're trying to reach the many, and we don't even reach the few. See, Jesus allocated his time and energy to focus and bring radical change out of it. And we think sometimes we can do it better than the Messiah. But Jesus went up, he went in, and then he pivots with those 12 disciples, and they just get to watch right now, because this is early in their training. They're not doing the work of ministry, they're seeing the master do it. What does he do? Well, people are coming from all over. Heal, cast out a demon, cleanse a leper, preach the gospel of the kingdom. He's doing the work of ministry. He's doing out. And so this is really simple language for me to get a picture of what does Jesus-shaped ministry, Jesus-shaped life look like. It looks like up, in, and out. So, Jesus-shaped life. But I'd like you to do this real quick. If you think of up, your relationship with the Father, your daily, weekly, monthly practices that you put in, the development of relationship capital that you have with the Father, your intimacy, this may be Bible reading, worship, prayer. Up can show itself in a lot of different ways. It's not going to church, though. Rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. How strong is your up? I'm not going to have you report out on it, so you can keep it private. But then on the in is not just, do I know people at the potluck? In is not just, do I have folks in my small group? In is, do I have other people going the same direction, encouraging and spurring me on to the love and good deeds that Scripture says we should be doing with one another? There's Pastor Glenn. Rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. How's your in? Is it deep, intimate, and close? Or is it critical, gossipy, churchy? There's a huge difference between the quality of each of those. And then out. Jesus actually engaged with lost people. He was accused of being a drunkard because he hung out with people who drank. Now, I know for a holiness group, we're like, we get stuck on that. We try to reinterpret, reapply those things. But Jesus was considered a friend of sinners in the Northwest, in my territory in particular. The city does not want anything to do with the church. because the church is busy judging it, telling it why it's wrong. And so the city's moved on. They're finding other good news because the embodied ambassadors of the kingdom, I'll leave that blank for right now. They're doing stuff that's affecting you. How's your out? Do you have relationships with people outside of the church? Do you know anybody that's not saved, that's not in your family? Because you can't just count them in because you see them on Thanksgiving and whatever other holidays you see them on. Do you have people in your city, or are you so consumed with people in your church only? What you're up, what you're in, and what you're out. And most people tend to find, instead of living a balanced Jesus-shaped life, each of those growing and strong and vibrant like our Messiah, we're usually out of balance. We tend to prioritize one over the other. We tend to value certain things. Kimberly, would you go double check and see how the Ministers' Fellowship is shaping up? I didn't know if Pastor Glenn, thank you. There we go. So I'm going to skip forward to this, and I'm going to wrap up because I just got my cue that they're done. So these are the ways that we're, I'll do this instead. These are the ways that we're articulating those values of a Jesus-shaped life in Church of God Northwest. We're calling up that we're people who are passionate about pursuing the presence of Jesus. We want to be people consumed with worshiping the risen King. We want to be people who are using practices in community to form us and to shape us into Jesus-shaped people. And we want to be people who are proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom in word and deed. You'll notice over there, which of these three are you more naturally wired? And then I'll jump to this. In which area could you become a catalytic leader, champion in your church? Pastor Jerry said, do we really believe in the priesthood of all believers? In some ways, I'm going to poke fun of us right now. We have a group of special people meeting over there, and we're the not special people. I don't know if D.S. Warner would have liked that. Because I think Warner was about erasing the laity. Not erasing the clergy. Everybody is called. Everybody is equipped. And you're a pioneer or you're a developer. Go do it well. Bless you guys. Thanks so much for the time.